takes more strength, frankly, to walk away from a fight than engage it. The president will have no fight with me. I will not engage in it. I've sat here every day for 44 years asking New Yorkers to remember that this is not about me, it's about we.
While the governor of New York battles a rising death toll, he says he will not battle the president. As for who decides when the country will reopen, the president says his power is absolute, but the Constitution says otherwise.
We lost another teammate.
And while staff members inside this New York hospital hold a moment of silence over the loss of a coworker, the biggest antibody test in the country is now underway. Tests that could prove key. But Dr. Anthony Fauci warns these tests and contact tracing are not ready yet. But as we wait, families remain in dire need. And overseas hard-hit Spain begins loosening restrictions. So what can we learn from their example? Former President Obama finally weighs in on the 2020 race. And this expression of gratitude from an Ohio man thanking the healthcare workers who helped him beat COVID-19. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. From the moment the magnitude of COVID-19 really hit, many of us started wondering what the future would look like, life post-coronavirus. Well, that's what the president and governors and so many Americans are really focused on now. What is the best way forward, and what will that new normal be? In California today, the governor described a plan to reopen, including temperature checks, mandatory masks, and no large gatherings all summer. But first, the present. 80 million Americans are expected to start receiving stimulus checks by tomorrow, and another grim day here in the epicenter. New York City surpassing 10,000 dead after adding nearly 4,000 people to its death toll who never received a test and died outside of a hospital. The city's health commissioner vows to correctly count every death, saying behind every death is a friend, a family member, a loved one. But tonight, President Trump and several governors are on a collision course as far as who has the power to reopen. Does it all come down to making a choice between saving the economy or saving lives? Our Tom Llamas has more on that and where officials fear is becoming the next epicenter of this pandemic.
In head-to-toe protective gear, members of the National Guard on the hunt for an invisible killer. This is no lab. It's a nursing home in Massachusetts. The Guard there to test residents. And tonight, it's growing increasingly clear these facilities are the new epicenter of the crisis.
Nursing homes have been an increasing issue because that is the vulnerable population in the vulnerable place.
Tonight, ABC News learning 25% of COVID-19 deaths in New York State were in nursing homes and adult care facilities. In Massachusetts, it's nearly 45%. And in Philadelphia, a staggering 50%. In New Jersey, we've seen first responders evacuating residents. And in just one facility in Richmond, Virginia, the Canterbury Nursing Home, 45 people have died, 3 in the past 24 hours. All of them from the coronavirus.
We were barely able to give basic care for our patients at the beginning because of the staffing shortages.
As these clusters emerge, we are seeing the virus sweep across the country. Louisiana reporting its deadliest day yet as the toll in that state rises above 1,000.
Every one of these numbers is a person. It's one of our neighbors. It's one of our friends. It's somebody's parent, somebody's child.
We're also seeing outbreaks in a handful of states where Republican governors have resisted imposing stay-at-home orders. South Dakota, now home to one of the largest coronavirus clusters anywhere in the U.S. Nearly 450 workers at a pork processing plant in Sioux Falls are sick, and more than 100 people who came into contact with them are now testing positive. The mayor begging the governor to act.
We're growing increasingly concerned about the need to mitigate that spike before it overwhelms our hospitals.
But South Dakota's governor insisting a statewide stay-at-home order wouldn't help.
I should always keep my eye on the ball and make sure that I'm making decisions to actually do good, not make decisions that just make people feel good.
In places like New York, where the curve is flattening, hospitals still admitting 1,600 new COVID patients.
Do you know how many admissions we had yesterday?
At Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn, the toll is personal.
We found out this morning that we lost another teammate.
President Trump is hoping to reopen parts of the economy on May 1st. But from Dr. Anthony Fauci today, a note of caution.
I think if we are assuming that 2 weeks from now, that all the curves are going to be down, I think that's a bit overly optimistic.
Governors now fighting two battles, one to flatten the curve, the other to plan for the day they can reopen their states. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom envisioning what life might look like when that happens.
You may be having dinner with a waiter wearing gloves, maybe a face mask, dinner where the menu is disposable.
Governors on the East and West Coast banding together to strategize. But the president, who resisted calls for a national shutdown, now insists he will decide when the country will reopen for business.
I have the ultimate authority. The President of the United States calls the shots.
It prompted a backlash.
He basically declared himself King Trump.
And this morning on Twitter, the president compared the outcry from governors to a mutiny.
The president is clearly spoiling for a fight on this issue. I put my hand out in total partnership and cooperation with the president. If he wants a fight, he's not going to get it from me.
And Tom joins us now from New York City. Tom, we're hearing President Trump and multiple governors talk about flattening curves. But let's be clear. I mean, there's still a lot of cases and a lot of deaths. Have you gotten any sense in the calls that you've been on with governors if there's a number that they're looking for before reopening?
You know, Lindsay, there's no rush to do this. I mean, and we even heard that with California's governor today, Gavin Newsom, talking about they don't want to do this too quickly. But I think what shocked a lot of people is sort of what the California governor said about what the post-pandemic life may look like. Going to a restaurant, having a waiter wear gloves with a disposable menu, wearing a mask. I think that may shock some people, but maybe that's what it might take to put people back in restaurants. I think people are still trying to figure all this out, and we're still weeks away. No one wants to rush this. And even Dr. Anthony Fauci said, as you heard in my report, May 1st may be very optimistic. We could still be weeks and weeks away. Lindsay?
So they're talking about reopening, but doesn't mean it's happening right now. All right, Tom Llamas, thanks so much. And let's go now to Washington, where President Trump weighed in on the debate with governors over who has the right to reopen the country. And he's also announced a major action against the World Health Organization. Terry Moran joins us now live. Terry, as Tom just covered, these groups of governors on both the West Coast and in the Northeast, they're moving forward to figure out plans based on their own metrics. The president seemed to just soften his stance a bit in the briefing this evening. But what did he have to say about how these governors should move forward?
Well, he wants to be seen as taking the lead on this matter. And the way he does it is he says he is going to have the federal government issue guidelines. And then in a call with the governors, he will authorize the governors, give them permission to open their states in a time, place, and manner of their own choosing, which is really what the constitutional structure and the public health laws would provide, that each governor or regional compacts of governors, which we're seeing, as you mentioned, in West and East, would decide based on local conditions, on their own assessment of the risks and benefits in opening up, in how they would do it. But President Trump essentially wants to cheerlead and provide federal expertise and federal guidelines for them to do it.
Now, the president did take a harsh stance against the World Health Organization, saying that he'll suspend their funding and hitting them for opposing his decision to stop travel from China back in February. Let's take a listen.
Thousands and thousands of people would have died. Had other nations likewise suspended travel from China, countless more lives would have been saved. Instead, look at the rest of the world, look at parts of Europe, other nations and regions who followed WHO guidelines and kept their borders open to China, accelerated the pandemic all around the world.
Does the president have a legitimate gripe here, Terry, or is this just a bit of a blame game as he takes some criticism for his early actions? And how significant is it to potentially hold funding from the WHO?
It is a significant step, and many people believe that it is overdue. The WHO has a very difficult task. It needs the goodwill of countries to report outbreaks transparently and to respond to them based on evidence. In order to do that, it doesn't have any enforcement mechanism. It is a diplomatic organization as well. But with China, in this case and before, many people see the World Health Organization as enabling China's deceit of the world. There's no question that China held off admitting that they had an outbreak of a new contagion. They punished physicians like Wen Liang in their own country who tried to blow the whistle. And it wasn't until mid-January, weeks, perhaps even months after this disease first emerged in the human population, that they came clean. And even then, they didn't allow the World Health Organization or the U.S. Centers for Disease Control to get to China to investigate. So this relationship between the World Health Organization and China has been problematic. President Trump, as is his majesty, taking a very, very blunt way of trying to address it. But many public health experts believe that the World Health Organization has put politics too far ahead of public health, and something needs to change.
All right, Terry Moran for us in Washington, D.C. tonight. Terry, thank you. And joining us now, Delaware Governor John Carney, who is part of the group of East Coast governors teaming up to coordinate just when and how to go about reopening. Thanks so much for joining us, Governor.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's good to be with you.
And as you've heard, President Trump says that he has the ultimate authority on reopening states. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, now's not the time to have an argument or fight with the President of the United States and our partners at the federal government. Now is the time to work with our federal partners to sort out the future. First of all, to make sure that we're flattening our curve here in the state of Delaware, and we've got a state of emergency, a declaration in place with a stay-at-home order, with a traveling quarantine from people coming from out of our states. We've joined this coalition to help the governors think through how do we restart our economies, how do we have a rolling recovery, as people have referred to it. My good friend, the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, says it's not like flicking on a switch. It's more like a dimmer switch where we're going to move and open the economy gradually, and we'll be working together as part of that coalition. I was excited to join because I know we'll get access to the best thinking, the best science, and we'll base our decisions here on Delaware on the situation on the ground and the data and the science that's directing us.
Is it too early to talk about a timeline when that might happen for Delaware or in general along the East Coast?
Yeah, I do think it's way too early. You know, we're still seeing an increase in the number of positive cases, about 8% a day. Our hospitalization rate is a little bit lower than in other places across the country, and that's a good thing. It enables us to have hospital capacity, particularly for the most vulnerable populations, our senior citizens. But we're still seeing an increase in positive cases, an increase, although slower, in hospitalizations, and an increase, sadly, in deaths here in Delaware.
And as you say, we're having this conversation about reopening states as cases continue to rise, people continue to pass away. How do you walk that tightrope of balancing the economy and saving lives?
It's a very difficult decision. I think the decisions to open the economy back up are going to be even more difficult than the decisions to close it down, because it really is uncharted waters. At what point in the curve do you start turning on that dimmer switch and start opening up businesses? I hear the anguish in the small business owners on the phone that I talk to all the time. The fear that they're going to lose their business. I hear the anguish from people that are unemployed and want to go back to work. But we have to have a healthy community before we can have a healthy economy again. And it's not a false choice. We have to have both, but they have to be sequential. We have to have a healthier community and then be able to start turning on the economy and getting a stronger economy again. And that's really the challenge before us, and we really need to work together as governors here in this region, working with our federal partners and the White House Task Force as well.
Until there's a vaccine, are you worried that the virus could come back in the fall, say, and Delaware and other states would have to go through this all over again? I mean, essentially, is there a way without a vaccine for people to try to go back to normal?
I am worried about that, and I'm worried about turning that light switch on a little bit too quickly and having what I've heard referred to as a rebound. We certainly don't want that. You know, ideally, we don't want to turn the economy back on a day too soon or a day too late. Meeting that happy medium is going to be really challenging, and that's why doing it and making those decisions with the other governors in our region, led by Governor Cuomo, who's really had the most difficult situation there in New York, and our thoughts and prayers are with him every day. But our other states in that region and here in the greater Philadelphia region in the lower part of our state, there on the shore, have a different situation, and we'll make decisions here based on the facts on the ground, but with the help and assistance and guidance of that coalition.
A lot of people around across the country have homes on Airbnb. Delaware, for example, is a state that has a large amount of second homes on the beach. And with the summer rental season approaching, do you anticipate allowing people to rent out their homes? And what about businesses that rely on so many tourists?
Yeah, well, right now we've shut that down. It's one of the last things, the most recent things that we did, because it was creating a problem for us with people coming in. You know, we're a small little state, and we're bisected by the Interstate 95. That's the main corridor north and south here in the East Coast, and by the Amtrak Northeast corridor. And so we've got a lot of people coming across our border. And that's why it's important to work with the coalition to see if we can coordinate the reopening. So something is not open somewhere else, or open here where it's not open somewhere else. We have people streaming across our borders. We had that situation earlier in March around St. Patrick's Day with bars and restaurants, and with our beautiful beaches on a beautiful spring day that we had. And that's one of the reasons to coordinate with the other governors in the region.
Are you and the other governors open to working with additional states in order to come up with a cohesive plan?
Yeah, absolutely, and we do through the National Governors Association. Governor Hogan just over the line in Maryland. He's our chair, and he's doing a wonderful job leading our group. We have a couple calls a week on the conference call with the White House, with Vice President Pence and their team. We take the information that they provide us kind of on a national scale in terms of protective equipment, testing capacity, the science about recovery, and all of that. And so we do. We use the experience in other states, the experience across the country, and the experts at the federal level for our response and for our decision-making. And that's the way it should be.
Governor Carney, thank you so much for your time and insight tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
As we look to return to some semblance of normalcy, testing may be the most important thing to help get us there. And not just testing, but testing on a large scale, where anyone who wants a test can truly get one, which is something that we really haven't seen since the outbreak began. Another big factor will be something called contact tracing, trying to find and isolate anyone who's been in contact with someone who has COVID-19. So where do we stand on all that right now? ABC's chief national correspondent Matt Gutman has a closer look.
Tonight, amid fears of a second wave of the virus, the nation's largest antibody test. 38,000 employees at Beaumont Health Center in Michigan started screening to see who has COVID antibodies and could be immune. The CDC director saying these tests need to be in place ahead of the next spike. Emergency workers getting them in California.
Everyone's concerned that we get over the apex of the curve. They're worried about a spike again downstream.
And now emerging, a case of the virus possibly striking twice. Okbunli became infected in March. She had mild symptoms and was believed to have made a full recovery, testing negative about a week ago. But on Monday, she died from COVID-19. In 1918, the Spanish flu first struck in March. It then subsided. Its second wave far more deadly than the first. The pandemic ultimately killing more than 50 million people worldwide.
If we do something stupid, you will see those numbers go right back up tomorrow. Period.
And across the country tonight, an experimental plasma treatment allowing patients who've had the virus and recovered to donate their blood. It's now being fast-tracked by the FDA. Randy Spires is in critical condition. His daughter is begging for someone to donate plasma to save him.
I hate to say it's our last hope, but it is our next hope.
There are indications the treatment may work. Jimmy Hayden's wife dropped him off at the hospital on April 2nd.
By 7 o'clock that night, he was on a ventilator. I did not expect that at all.
He's been intubated since then. Last Thursday, he got the plasma treatment, and on Monday, he was able to give his wife Ashley that thumbs up. His doctors now say he might be taken off the ventilator today.
If you could talk to that first donor, what would you say to him?
because I don't know what to say other than thank you. And I don't think it expresses enough of how I feel.
Okay, and I think we just lost our live shot with Matt Gutman. We'll try to get back to him later on in the show. And we have him now, it's my understanding. Matt, you hear me? So, voila.
I do.
And he appears. Matt Gutman joins us now live with more. Matt, as we just saw, plasma donations could be a big factor in helping people recover. Tell us more about that.
It's an experimental treatment, right? I mean, we don't know for certain whether it works. These are only anecdotal instances. Some people getting the plasma treatment, it seems to work for them. But this has been tried before as early as 1918, over 100 years ago, to try to treat the Spanish flu. And indications were that it did have some success in the treatment of people who had that flu. But all viruses act differently, and there needs to be a lot more peer-reviewed study before we know that this is the silver bullet that can help treat COVID-19. Again, there is no known treatment so far. The only thing everybody is waiting for is that vaccine, Lindsay.
Certainly waiting for the vaccine. And Matt, you just spoke with California Governor Newsom a few minutes ago, and it sounds like it was a very sobering conversation about the reality of just what it may take for that state to return to normal. Share a little bit about what he said.
You know, Lindsay, it was a discussion that was billed as opening up the state, plans for opening up the state of California, the 5th biggest economy in the world. But what it really was the governor explaining to the people and then to me in our conversation about how things are really not going to change. This not normal is going to persist. Social distancing is here to stay. Restaurants may start to open, but you're not going to go to concerts. There's not going to be amusement parks. Kids are not going to go to camp. When they go back to school September 8th or late August, when people start to do that, they're going to be in staggered classes. Nothing is going to be the same in this state until there is either herd immunity, which is unlikely, or a vaccine. He understands that this is going to crater the economy. He is aware there are already 2.7 million people who filed for unemployment just in the past 32 days. But this is about saving lives, and you take the foot off the brake pedal on COVID social distancing, and he says this virus is going to spike back up, and it's just not something he's willing to do right now. Lindsay.
Wow, so this new normal may not be normal at all. Matt Gutman for us live in California. Thanks, Matt. And tracking and testing this virus might be the key to reopening our economy, as we've discussed. So what role should the federal government play in all of this? For more, let's bring in Ron Klain, former Ebola czar for the Obama administration and former chief of staff for Joe Biden. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
So let's start big picture. From your experience responding to the Ebola crisis, what does the federal government need to do to have one unified response to both the outbreak itself and also to the economy?
Well, look, I mean, I think the president needs to take leadership in a way that he's been unwilling to do so. He stood up last week and said that testing was a state problem. Each state needed to solve it for itself. And that's not going to get it done. We need a national approach. We need to be able to use the president's authorities under the Defense Production Act to accelerate the production of testing kits, to make sure they're distributed around the country. So we not only can do what you talked about a minute ago, test anyone who wants it, but actually go out and conduct surveillance, go into nursing homes, see where the disease is, go into senior centers, see where the disease is, find the disease before it kills people. That's the kind of testing we need to make America safe. We are nowhere near that. A month after we basically hit the 100,000 test mark, we're still only at about 150,000 tests a day. That is way, way, way too few.
And in the midst of trying to battle coronavirus, we're also seeing this battle emerge of this power grab, if you will, between, who has the power to reopen the country and the states? Is it the president or is it the governors? As Joe Biden would say, is this just a bunch of malarkey? I mean, what's the bottom line here?
The virus has the power to decide what's open and what's closed. And I think the sensible governors, both Democrats and Republicans, on a bipartisan basis, are listening to their healthcare experts. It's also not good for the economy. You heard Governor Carney say this earlier in your show. If you open up stores and people get sick going to stores, they're not going to go to stores anymore. If people are getting sick going to restaurants, that's going to kill the restaurant industry. So this really is a false choice. We have to get this disease under control before we reopen things. We have to reopen things the right way, carefully, as you've been talking about tonight. And most of all, we have to have testing in place so we can separate the sick from the well, so we can track where the disease is going, how fast it's getting there, and then the treatment available for those who turn out to be sick. There's a lot of work to be done on the health side. President Trump is not leading the country in doing that. It's been left to the governors to doing that. They're doing their best, but without the kind of authority that the president has, we're hopelessly behind on addressing this.
You've also said that we're behind other countries in testing. Now some states are moving toward loosening social distancing guidelines to reopen their economies. How important is our virus and antibody testing to that process?
Well, I think, Lindsay, we just don't know yet about antibody testing. We don't really know. You had a story a minute ago about a person who possibly got sick a second time. We don't know with this virus, if you get the virus, how much immune you are going forward and how long you're going to be immune going forward. Now, with things like colds, there aren't permanent lifetime immunity like you have with measles or chickenpox. So this question of what the antibody tests tell us is an important thing that we need clinical trials to sort out. For the time being, what we really need are spot diagnostic tests, or the kind of tests that we are just getting the technology to do, an expansion of these swab tests that your viewers are seeing on their screens right now. We need to be testing about 500 to 750,000 people a day to test about 1% of the country every week. We're really operating at just a third of that amount right now. We really need to step that up.
How much of a risk is there for a possibility of a second deadlier wave in the coming weeks if we reopen up things too quickly?
Well, I think whether or not the second wave is deadly or not, or just as horrible as this one, a second wave of any sort is going to be devastating. And I think unfortunately, there is a risk of that. We're seeing that in Singapore, where they reopened, and we're starting to see a surge of cases there. Again, they're perhaps even more cases the second time than the first time. As you mentioned a minute ago, that was true for Spanish flu back in 1919 on the second go-round. So maintaining these restrictions as long as they're needed until we get the disease under control, until we can test people carefully, until we can treat those who are sick, that's the way both to keep us healthier and in the long run to create a more sustainable economic growth without these fits and starts and stops, on and off, the kind of thing that's that's what's going to happen if we don't take all the right steps.
It appears that there's been some tension between NIH Director Anthony Fauci and President Trump in recent days. You've worked with Fauci before. Do you think it's important that President Trump follows his lead?
Well, Tony Fauci is the gold standard, not just for the United States and for around the world. President Ronald Reagan relied on him in the beginning of the fight against HIV/AIDS. The number of lives Dr. Fauci saved in that fight is too high to possibly imagine. President Obama relied on him in the fight against Ebola. Every other president, Democrat and Republican, has treated Tony Fauci's advice as the most important medical advice they can get. And there's no reason why President Trump should be any different than them. Dr. Fauci has provided impartial medical advice to 6 U.S. presidents, to leaders around the world. He's the best advice we have, and I hope President Trump will do what his predecessors did and take Dr. Fauci's advice very, very seriously.
You are, of course, advising Joe Biden's presidential campaign. He became the presumptive Democratic nominee last week when Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race. What can Biden do about this pandemic as a candidate, not an elected official? And how would his administration respond if he goes on to beat President Trump in November?
Well, first of all, as a candidate, what he can do is he can tell people what he would do differently. And he's been doing that all along. He's offered up his advice directly to President Trump over the phone. He's offered it on the stump. If people want to see what he would do, you can go to joebiden.com. You can see the plan he laid out in the middle of March. If he's president, what I can tell you about Joe Biden is what he did when he was in the White House before, which is he'll listen to science first. He'll listen to people like Dr. Fauci. That's what he did when we were fighting H1N1, and particularly when we were fighting Ebola in 2014. He'll take the advice from the medical experts first and foremost. He'll also use his full authorities. Again, President Trump talks a good game about his absolute power, but the power he really has the power to take control of the supply chain, to demand that more tests be made, to demand that more gear be made, to get that gear out. That's the power President Trump's refused to use. That's a power Joe Biden would use as president if this is still going on when he becomes president, to make sure that we are testing the American people, we're making our healthcare workers safe when they treat us.
Ron Klain, we so appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks for having me.
And when we come back, hard hit Spain now loosening up some of their restrictions as they begin their process of trying to return to normal, what their government plans to hand out by the millions. When your house is destroyed, where do you go in the middle of a pandemic? We're tracking the aftermath of those deadly tornadoes. And it's the endorsement everyone saw coming. Up next, former President Barack Obama finally weighs in on the race for 2020, what he had to say about President Trump. But first, our myth bust of the day. Are you going to be taxed on those stimulus checks?
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Right now, how do you make sense of it all? Now, afternoons on ABC, one place with the good information you need.
We are all in this together, and we're going to get through this together.
Pandemic, what you need to know. Afternoons at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC.
I get some scrubs. I'm going to get mask, face shield, and I am going to start my shift. Most of our beds are taken up by intubated patients, meaning patients who can't breathe on their own and who are on the ventilator. Almost everybody is on oxygen, and almost everybody is a COVID patient. So today there are 43 people in the department. That's pretty much full, but I have to say it's doing a lot better than a couple weeks ago when we had 86 to 96 in the department. We have a full ICU. We have every patient in here on a ventilator. Everybody has coronavirus, but some people also have heart attacks. Tomorrow's going to be tough because I am going to homeschool all day and I work overnight. I hope I can get a nap in at some point, but like I said, it's just me, so it really depends.
Our hats off again to those working on the front lines. And tonight, a major update in the race for 2020. In a 12-minute video, Joe Biden picked up the coveted endorsement of his last boss. So what did former President Barack Obama have to say about Biden's competitor? Our Mary Bruce reports.
Barack Obama today stepped off the sidelines and into the presidential race.
I'm so proud to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States.
He says his former vice president is best suited to lead the country out of this crisis.
Joe has the character and the experience to guide us through one of our darkest times and heal us through a long recovery.
Obama doesn't mention President Trump by name, but his message to the White House is clear.
This crisis has reminded us that government matters, that having leaders who are informed and honest, those kind of leaders matter.
Obama has been largely silent in this race, but behind the scenes, he's been working to unite the party, speaking several times with Bernie Sanders, who yesterday made his own Biden endorsement. The former rivals now coming together to try and beat Trump.
And Mary Bruce joins us now. Certainly a welcome endorsement from the Biden campaign. What are they saying today? And what are the signs as far as how much we should expect to hear from the former president and how involved he might be in supporting Biden's campaign going forward?
Well, Lindsay, this endorsement is a really big deal. Look, Joe Biden had said he wanted to earn this on his own merits, but today he is obviously welcoming the endorsement of the former president. He actually thanked him online, calling him his friend Barack, and posted a picture of the two of them high-fiving, saying, "Let's do this." Now, Barack Obama, of course, has been largely absent from this campaign. He clearly wanted to let this process play out. Now that he is officially making his first foray into this race and announcing this endorsement, he says he wants to get out on the campaign trail as soon as he can do so safely.
And we're also hearing from the Trump campaign on this endorsement. What's been the reaction?
No surprise here. They are already trying to fundraise off of President Obama's endorsement of Joe Biden. They issued a rather scathing statement suggesting that Obama is only endorsing Biden because he's simply the last man standing on the Democratic side, saying he had no choice but to endorse his former vice president. They are pointing out that Obama has been on the sidelines and now, of course, is getting in, suggesting that that's a negative for Joe Biden. Lindsay.
Mary Bruce for us in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much, Mary. And we still have a lot more to get to here on ABC News Prime. Professional wrestling, it's considered an essential business in one state. Why? And they live among us and in the shadows, how the homeless are coping in one city during this pandemic. And our post of the day, the wildlife in Yosemite reportedly love the lack of human intrusion.
In times like these, the news-making events happen here. ABC News.
President Trump meeting face-to-face with one of the world's most brutal dictators, Kim Jong-un.
The president.
You trust him? I do trust him, yeah. I think he trusts me, and I trust him.
Ivanka Trump.
I have to ask you about your emails. Your father had taken Hillary Clinton to task for this.
There just is no equivalency.
So the idea of lock her up doesn't apply to you?
No.
Comey.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange.
Michelle Obama.
What do you wish you could tell your pre-White House self?
Melania Trump.
Do you think there's still people there that he can't trust?
Yes.
Still working out?
Yes.
Michael Cohen.
So he's still lying?
Yes.
It's a big statement.
And now, in a year with so much on the line, we're right there.
Good evening tonight from Washington, a very busy news night.
America's #1 news source, ABC News, straightforward.
Welcome back. For the nation's homeless population, social distancing is nearly impossible in crowded homeless shelters, raising concerns about the potential spread of coronavirus among those already struggling. So let's take a look at what's being done here in New York by the numbers. City officials say at least 26 homeless people have died of the 421 confirmed to have COVID-19 in New York City. That's from the city's total homeless population of nearly 79,000. The nightly shelter population has swelled in recent weeks, especially among the more than 17,000 men and women who sleep in the city's dormitory-like group shelters for single adults. Now, to reduce density in those group shelters, the city is spending $200 a night to rent hotel rooms where symptomatic homeless people, as well as vulnerable seniors, can be isolated. According to Mayor Bill de Blasio, some 6,000 single New Yorkers will be living in those hotels rather than shelters by next Monday. And with some homeless still sheltering on subways or the streets, New York is also adding 230 additional beds in facilities outside homeless shelters to try to get more individuals off the street. The city is also staggering meal times at shelters to limit gatherings and reduce how much shelter residents have to leave facilities each day to avoid potential exposure. And still a lot more to report here on ABC News Prime. The violent tornadoes that ripped across the South, killing 34 people and leaving many without homes. And now the question, where do they go in the middle of a pandemic? We continue to monitor the impact of COVID-19 on our nation's food supply. Last night we spoke with a farm owner. Tonight we'll hear how farm workers are doing and how their safety concerns are being heard amidst this crisis. But first, here are some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
Seeing right now, this is part of the eye wall. This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys.
So this is the 4th weekend of protest.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. So if you like getting behind the biggest news stories of the day, inside all the details, the backstory, and what will happen next, then listen to Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. It's like no other news podcast out there. Even the critics agree. Listen free on Apple Podcasts.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want.
ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you.
ABC News Live. It's that easy to go there.
President Trump begins the daily White House coronavirus task force briefing by announcing that U.S. funding to the World Health Organization is on hold for its response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Today, I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus.
President Trump today meeting with Americans who've recovered from the coronavirus and now vowing to work hand in hand with states over when to reopen the economy.
The fear of a second wave is very real. Just days after reopening Wuhan, China is now scrambling to contain an outbreak on its northern border. Its biggest rise in cases for 6 weeks. Hundreds of new infections have been reported from returning Chinese nationals in Shuifenhei. It's near Russia, and that town is now on lockdown. And in Europe, strategies are diverging. Spain is a country that's going the furthest in Europe in loosening restrictions, allowing those in manufacturing and construction to return to work. Austria and Italy also opening thousands of smaller shops in an effort to restart their economies, although the stay-at-home order for most is still in place.
Some welcome relief for Americans hit the hardest by the coronavirus pandemic.
I was very excited because now I know I can take care of a few more things that I had to put on the back burner.
Word, some of those stimulus checks have started to hit bank accounts as Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin reveals 80 million Americans will get their payment by Wednesday.
Officials say the U.S. food supply is strong enough to last through the pandemic, but hundreds of essential workers at a major meat processing plant, Smithfield Foods in South Dakota, which is the largest pork producer in the world, have contracted the virus. There are also reports that some farms actually have an oversupply of foods because they aren't getting their usual restaurant orders.
I'm so proud to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States. Choosing Joe to be my vice president was one of the best decisions I ever made, and he became a close friend. And I believe Joe has all the qualities we need in a president right now.
Joe Biden getting the endorsement from his former boss, Barack Obama, today. The former president throwing his support behind Biden, laying out stakes during this time of crisis.
Joe has the character and the experience to guide us through one of our darkest times and heal us through a long recovery.
The cleanup is now underway across the South, where violent tornadoes have killed 34 people from Texas to the Carolinas. Scores of homes were lost, just as most Americans are being told to shelter in place. ABC's Victor Oquendo takes us inside the devastation.
Lindsay, this neighborhood was shredded by that punishing line of storms on Easter Sunday. The cleanup now underway here in Monroe, Louisiana, and across so much of the South. More than 70 reported tornadoes killing more than 30 people. Now hundreds of families facing this two-headed problem, how to rebuild their lives in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. In Louisiana and in South Carolina, the Department of Homeland Security and the Red Cross opting not to open up shelters like they normally would following a major storm. Instead, they're moving displaced families into hotels. That should help with social distancing, but keep in mind, these people lost everything, including all those essential supplies that they'd stocked up on. So while they're being put up in hotels for at least the next 2 weeks, they face a tough road ahead under a different set of circumstances. Mississippi's governor saying, unfortunately, those winds did not stop the spread of the virus. Lindsay?
Difficult times there. Victor, thank you for that. Europe has always been a few weeks ahead of us in this global fight against COVID-19. Their cases surged before ours, and now some nations in the EU bloc are taking baby steps to get back to work. Maggie Rulli has this report.
You remember the images, healthcare workers struggling to keep the sick alive, the ICUs overflowing. Spain was hit harder than most nations, and for the first time in weeks since COVID-19 claimed over 18,000 lives, tonight, some relief. That nation's allowing some non-essential workers back on the job. Officials there trying to revive an economy on life support, as they, like much of the world, are desperate to get back to normal. While some are eager to get a semblance of their old lives back.
I think that they did this at the right time. People are keeping the safe distance, and I think it is very good.
For others, it's a sense of unease.
The situation is a bit strange because you still see a few people on the streets. We are all confined, and I feel a bit strange.
In Madrid, those who venture out are handed face masks, courtesy of the government. A necessary precaution when the invisible enemy can strike again at any moment. In Barcelona, people are still on alert.
I've been a month in quarantine now. Everyone is taking a lot of measurements. The streets are still very empty, so you're able to take your distance from everyone. And I think it's a matter of taking the right precautions yourself.
Some of the businesses allowed to resume include those working in construction and manufacturing. Others working in shops and bars and public spaces must wait almost 2 more weeks while officials closely monitor the infection rate. For Austria, the back-to-work order is methodical. Small mom-and-pop shops are being permitted to reopen, while restaurants and larger stores have to hold out until May. We saw streets slowly starting to fill again as China loosened lockdown restrictions 2 weeks ago. And while those who lived in the original epicenter of the outbreak in Wuhan were permitted to leave their homes, the fear of the unknown remained.
So it looks like things are fairly normal. It's kind of weird leaving the neighborhood. There's still like all these guards set up and stuff, and you have to scan a QR code to get out. I think they just kind of track you. I think we're just gonna play it cautious. Just go chill out at home. Maybe not leave the neighborhood for a while.
One thing is certain among those who have lived through this outbreak: no one wants a resurgence. But now that some European countries are starting to lift lockdowns, the inconsistencies within the EU bloc may be a new cause for concern. France and the UK just extended their restrictions until next month.
Everywhere in mainland France and in the overseas territories, the system is under strain and the epidemic is not yet under control.
Heads of state will have to reconcile how to deal with a plunging economy, perhaps the worst since the Great Depression, while families and communities grieve loved ones and an uncertain future.
And Maggie Rulli joins us now from London. And Maggie, while Spain and Austria attempt to reopen, Britain is still really in the thick of things like we are here in the U.S.
Yeah, exactly, Lindsay. Unfortunately, we are still seeing some high numbers that are very scary to be living through. More than 700 deaths again today in the UK. We saw more deaths, more hospitalizations over yesterday. And that's why, unlike some of our neighbors here in the UK, we're extending this lockdown. We're expected to extend it for weeks, although the exact length of that extension is still somewhat unknown. We're not alone, though. France is also extending their lockdown, which, Lindsay, leads to so many questions about what's going to happen here in Europe. When you have some countries, like you mentioned, Austria, Spain, Italy starting to tentatively loosen up some of these lockdowns. Then you have the UK and France getting stricter and tightening up. You know, it begs the question, what's the future going to look like? Is there going to be a new normal with borders open and trade freely and supply chains operating? Or is this the new normal that we're going to have to get used to? So even as some countries are opening up, there's still so many questions, Lindsay.
And Maggie, as you know, today the IMF released a dire warning saying the global economy could be plunging into its worst period since the 1930s, talking, of course, about when the Great Depression happened. How is the European bloc handling the crushing job losses?
Yeah, well, Lindsay, this whole thing started off as a medical crisis, but now it's quickly becoming an economical crisis as well. And here in the EU, we're seeing this firsthand. We know that millions are potentially going to be out of work, and the governments are trying to step up. We're seeing an unprecedented stimulus package here in the EU with more than 1 million companies across the continent that have signed on, saying they're going to try to avoid having to lay off their workers. But there was just still so much unknown. And just today, the UK came out telling people here, warning us to prepare for some tough times ahead financially. and even, Lindsay, telling people that they're not going to be able to support every household, every business. So these kind of warnings are stark. They are hard to hear, but unfortunately, we know we're not alone. Nearly every country in the world is going to be dealing with this kind of economic crisis, Lindsay.
Maggie Rulli, thanks for reporting in again for us tonight. Over the past few weeks, we've brought you several stories about the various points along our nation's food supply chain, from the empty grocery shelves to Americans lined up at food banks to the farmers who are burying and dumping their goods. All are impacted tremendously by this pandemic. But one of the first parts of this chain, we're talking about farm workers, those essential workers who remain in the fields picking our fruits and vegetables. So what's being done to keep them safe? Joining us now is someone who's dedicated her life's work to the rights of labor workers and co-founded the United Farm Workers, Dolores Huerta. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Dolores. What are you hearing from farm workers as far as their safety and what their most pressing issues are right now?
Well, farm workers are essential workers. They're on the front lines and they're working every single day out there to keep feeding the nation, but they are not being protected. Unfortunately, they're not wearing masks. It's very difficult for them to do the social distancing when they're working out there in the field. And so we feel that they're being very neglected. We have had farm workers that have died of the virus. We have had people, there were 4 workers in Colorado in a packing shed, in a meat packing shed there that died also. And so we see that the farm workers need a lot more attention. And unfortunately, in many states throughout the United States of America, they are not covered by unemployment insurance. They're not covered by disability insurance. They have very weak workers' compensation protections for them when they do get hurt. And these are the invisible people, and we've got to remember who they are. Only California, I believe in Hawaii, and maybe New York State now, gives farm workers even that type of protection of disability insurance and unemployment insurance. So, and in many states like Texas, they have very weak health care that will protect them when they get ill. So these are like our invisible workers that really we depend on every single day when we sit down to eat. Millions of farm workers throughout the United States of America that are not given the protection that they need.
Yeah, we're hoping to give them some visibility tonight. And you mentioned this a moment ago, talking about the health care. But what are the options that the majority of these workers have if they do get sick? And are there efforts to get them some hazard pay potentially?
Well, they definitely deserve hazard pay. We know that the agricultural industry was given $19 billion as part of the stimulus package. And we hope that they will share some of that money with their workers and give these workers hazard pay, while at the same time, the Trump administration is trying to reduce the wages of farm workers as we speak. These are the farm workers that come into our country, but that will have also a very damaging effect on the wages of the current farm workers. And when kids are also not at school, that means that one of the parents has to stay home with the children. So it compounds their difficulties and definitely has an impact on their income. And then we have a lot of undocumented farm workers that are also part of the food supply. And they, unfortunately, maybe except in California, are not going to be getting any kind of sustenance at all.
And President Trump just signed a stimulus bill that gave billions to the agriculture industry. How is agriculture going to share this money with the actual workers? And is there more that Congress could do in order to get resources directly to them?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think also under the emergency relief, a compensation that Congress is going to be giving out, that could go to some of our undocumented workers. And I think we have to appeal to the agricultural employers. Please share some of that money from the stimulus package with your workers, because they absolutely need it. It's embarrassing for our country to know that we have such a rich agricultural industry, but yet we have such deep poverty, especially the children of the families of farm workers. This is not fair, and this is a good time to correct it.
Dolores, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you joining us tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We turn now to Florida, where most businesses are shuttered. But today, an unlikely industry was deemed essential by state officials. World Wrestling Entertainment, or WWE, a company with close ties to President Trump. Despite the state's lockdown, wrestling fans will get live matches with no audience broadcasted from the company's Orlando training facility. Today in Virginia, a student from Liberty University filed a class action lawsuit against the school. The student is asking the university to pay the costs of room, board, and meal plans that allegedly were not provided while the school stayed open amid the pandemic. The student accused Liberty and its president, Jerry Falwell Jr., of downplaying the coronavirus threat. In a statement to ABC News, Liberty University claims the lawsuit is without legal merit. Sports have always brought people together, but what happens in a world with no sports? Next, the athletes, broadcasters, and fans that have gotten rather creative while in quarantine, and our moment of calm for the day. Have a little Zen moment here. It may be hard to remember sometimes, but yes, outside spring, it's in full bloom. Take a second and enjoy this virtual walk through the Japanese garden at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. Cherry blossoms in full bloom. Stay back. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Right now, how do you make sense of it all? Now, afternoons on ABC, one place with the good information you need.
We are all in this together, and we're going to get through this together.
Pandemic, what you need to know. Afternoons at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC. Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime, 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner of 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards, including the most prestigious honor, Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news choice.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want.
ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you. ABC News Live. It's that easy to go there.
ABC News, America's #1 news source. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
Brian and I both have wives who are nurses, and I understand that we have quite a few folks who are going to get on this airplane to travel down to the tri-state area to volunteer to help as medical professionals. I'd like to ask all of you, would you please stand up? I know my wife would be totally embarrassed if I asked him to do that. But on behalf of my wife, everybody in the tri-state area, and the rest of the country, and United Airlines, I really, really appreciate and thank you for what you are willing to volunteer to do.
A much-deserved salute. We salute them right back. And in these trying times, we've noticed that so much around us has changed, including the way we watch, interact, and play sports. But fear not, from athletes to couch potatoes, some creative minds are filling the void.
With empty courts and bare fields, we can't help but feel a certain emptiness living in a world without sports. But alas, the spirit of competition lives on. A little home foot pong, anyone? How about a handstand challenge? Even here at ABC News, we replaced March Madness and hosted our first annual virtual rock, paper, scissors tournament.
What do you got there, Mike?
I got rock. You got it.
Oh, Taylor wins. Paper covers rock. Taylor, congratulations.
And it didn't take long for some professional athletes to jump on board, taking on new sports virtually. From ESPN.
That'll do it. Mike Conley wins.
To the MLB Network.
Oh, it's so gross. What am I supposed to do?
even Fox Sports.
That's the whole run it out, and the winner is Hamlin.
And athletes are also finding new and creative ways to practice and have some fun at home. And we can't forget all those sports broadcasters. Even though the games have stopped, they're still doing play-by-play.
Michelle on the left is trying to prepare dinner. Wyatt on the right fighting back a yawn, dressed like kind of a half Fred Flintstone. And he wants to watch Blippi, folks. Oh, and he's hit his mom. He has hit his mom. Mom is playing it up. Wyatt is crying.
Creativity is king. And before we go tonight, the image of the day, a young guitarist paying tribute to healthcare workers in New York while others applauded. He took out his electric guitar and played the national anthem. This was a nod, of course, to Jimi Hendrix's famous rendition. The video got the attention of Jimi Hendrix's sister, who says she was delighted along with the rest of us. And that is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis, and we want to leave you now with tonight's tribute in New York City to our heroes on the front lines. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.
What you need to know right now. When President Trump declared a national emergency 1 month ago, there were about 2,000 cases of coronaviruses confirmed across the country. Today, that number hovers near the 2 million mark around the world. On the front line, the fight in a southern hotspot. We'll hear from the mayor of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Plus, the college application process in chaos. We'll talk to an admissions specialist who can help families craft a game plan of next steps in the uncertainty of the coronavirus emergency. And we're back on the USNS Comfort, the update from the captain on the mission and progress on board. And music fans tired of quarantine are in for a treat. Grammy winners Timbaland and Swiss Beats are here. Their new online beat battle.
Now from ABC Studios in Times Square, Amy Robach with What You Need to Know.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here for What You Need to Know. We're glad you're with us. The big developments we are tracking right now, the number of diagnosed COVID-19 cases worldwide now at more than 1.9 million. Today in the U.S., there are more than 582,000 confirmed